Okay, Robin Asher, I'm really excited. We're doing something new. This is called Crazy Town Classics. So I want to welcome all our listeners to Crazy Town Classics. And what we say about this, how we describe this is where we draw from the best of our past episodes. So we don't have to produce any new show in the here and now, right?
So you're excited because we get to be lazy. Is that what you're
Pretty
saying?
much.
Okay.
Yeah, we just get to sit around and live off our past, is it laurels or something?
Well, it's recycling, It's like not burning excess energy. It's right in line with the theme of the show.
This is a sustainable program.
This is investment income. All the money that we're making from advertising from this rerun is profit off of previous investment.
I mean, think about the money made on a franchise like Cheers or MASH or Seinfeld. The reruns, or Leave It to Beaver, or Father Knows Best, or I Dream of Jeannie.
You're mentioning shows half our listeners have never heard of.
Or Petticoat Junction.
Either because they're not in the U.S. or they're young.
You know, what I think this means we've reached a certain, gravitas, a certain threshold in the podcast
Or we've run out
space.
of ideas. One or the other. Anyways.
Asher, will you just let me just manage this right now and just sort of cool your jets for a moment? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So today's our first Crazy Town Classic episode, and it's episode 52, originally released way back in April 4th of 2022. So people get to hear how young we sounded back then. And it's titled Lord of the Swans, The Tragedy of the Enclosure of the Commons.
Do anyone remember this episode? Do you guys remember this?
Yeah,
I
of course.
remember it very well.
You do?
Yes.
Huh. Oh, I think I remember. This is the one where like 18 different bird species that were shoved in each other.
Okay. This is a big deal. Okay. Listeners, wait for this. There's an amazing discussion of what they used to do with swans. And I tell you, we think we're in age of progress, right? We think things are continually advancing. But back in the day, what they were able to do with swans outclasses turduckens by multitudes, let's just say.
Our Australian listeners who, if they have not listened to the episode the first time, will be astounded even by the concept of the turducken.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, but this goes way
Our
beyond
non-American listeners are going to be, and this is something, whole other thing. Okay, I remember the episode. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else besides the violation of swanhood? Do you remember?
Well, for me, I remember the violation of a staple from economics. You guys have heard of the tragedy of the commons, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's kind of upheld as a basic economic idea. It's kind of like if you got some forest or some pasture that you graze, it's going to get ruined because one greedy person takes too much, and that the incentive is the next greedy person takes too much. But anyway, we kind of trash that and realize that only is intuitive if we're talking about modern greed is good economics. So that was kind of a cool path in that episode, and I hope listeners kind of follow along with us in waking up like Keanu Reeves does in The Matrix.
Excellent. And so you have a high-minded take-home. Asher has his swan stuff. I'm going to go with this. There's a quote about this, like one of the elites or whatever. I don't know if he was a commerce person or a landed gentry or a lord. I don't remember. But the media at the time published his letter that was essentially denigrating the peasants and warning of the dangers of people having the ability to essentially build their own cottage and raise their own food, and how we needed to make sure this didn't happen because then they wouldn't be available to be wage earners for essentially the elites.
God forbid they be self-reliant.
Exactly. So the language was incredible. What you realize is that people loved being peasants because they had all this freedom. Like they knew how to take care of themselves and self-provision and community in ways that are difficult for us to imagine nowadays. So we talk about this, the freedom of movement, the ability to work as hard as you needed to get by and not work anymore, to not have a boss, and getting people into dirty factories and working for other people on farms, for commodity crops had to be essentially beaten into people. And this tragedy is that the enclosures, which is what this describes, was a way to create private property that didn't exist before. The entire concept of private property ends up being, we realize, this historic anomaly that was created essentially to remove people from their means of subsistence and then make them dependent upon the machines and the state.
So I think we should listen to your old self convincing your current self that this is in fact a tragedy.
Okay, well, let's run this show then. Let's go for it.
I'm Asher Miller.
I'm Rob Dietz.
I'm Jason Bradford. Welcome to Crazy Town, where this land ain't your land, this land ain't my land, this land belongs to king and queen. Okay, guys, I'm here to initiate Crazy Town Poetry Corner. Are you ready?
Oh, man.
I got one.
Yeah?
There once was a man from Nantucket.
No. Let's not get filthy. This is a family program.
Is this your cultured accent voice kind of thing going on? Is that what that is?
This is like his kindergarten teacher accent.
Guys, listen up. This is a very important poem that talks about a very important period in history. Are you ready?
Ready, please.
Please do something with that voice of yours.
The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater villain loose who steals the common from the goose. The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leaves the lords and ladies fine who take things that are yours and mine.
Wow, I really like that rhyme scheme. Super simple. Like you got stuff like, and when I squeeze the golden goose, I can drink lots of golden juice.
Yes, that was the next stanza, but I wasn't going there. That's a nice poem, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, we didn't even applaud you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. So I think
You wrote that, right?
No. This is like Middle Ages in England, basically.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Oh, like an unattributed poem.
Governor accent.
Yeah. Hey, governor. That's right. Now, that's a poem about geese, but it's also about what was happening at the time related to resources and quote-unquote ownership. But I have another question, though, before we get into the meat of the show.
Okay.
What's a bird that's bigger than a goose?
Ostrich.
Yeah.
You took mine. Emu.
Yeah.
Moa from New Zealand. They
Okay,
were like
but-
10 feet
but-
tall.
Dodo bird? Was Dodo bird bigger?
But in England.
Oh, in England.
Yes.
Big bird.
Yeah.
Big bird's not English.
Yes. Okay.
A swan.
Yes. Swan. You got it. Okay. So, during Elizabeth I's reign, the swan was a very popular dish for feasts for the royalty.
They would
And
eat the swan.
they had this system in place. Somehow the royal chefs, where they stuffed the carcass of the swan with 9 other birds.
Excuse me?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of it? Have you heard
it's
of
like a Russian nesting doll?
Yes. Have you ever heard of turducken? Which is something happens in the
that
South.
sounds like
That's two
amateur hour.
birds. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
right?
amateur hour. It's
I could conceptually make a turducken. I don't think I can make a 9-bird. They stuffed the small bird up the cloaca.
Let me
of the
tell you.
next
They start with the
size up.
hummingbird.
Let me read it. It's a nesting doll descending order, like you say.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Inside the swan is a goose. Inside the goose is a duck. Inside the duck is a mallard. I guess it was a smaller breed of duck. Inside the mallard's a chicken. Inside the chicken's a pheasant. Inside the pheasant's a partridge. Inside the partridge's a chicken. And inside the pigeon. And inside the pigeon is a woodcock. So, yeah, it's pretty good stuff.
Like, can you imagine trying to take your knife and get through all 9 layers?
Are they all shoved up each other's butts? Is that how it works?
I don't have detailed bon appetit.
I remember in
recipes.
the 80s, we used to go to Taco Bell and get a 7-layer burrito. I thought that had a lot of ingredients. But if I could get a 9-layer bird, I mean, that's...
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because, first of all, swans are owned by the queen. I don't want you to think, even dare imagine
What do you mean swans are owned by the
that
queen?
you could make a swan dinner like this yourself. As enticing as it is, the swans are the queens, for God's sakes. You know this, don't you?
No. What are you talking about?
Okay. Well, this goes back a long ways, but over time, the royalty of that part of the world basically just sort of taken over ownership of almost everything, you know?
Wait, so are you telling me that to this day, right now,
Yeah.
the Queen of England owns all the fucking swans in England?
Yeah.
This is almost as dumb as making a meal out of a swan stuffed with a goose, stuffed with a chicken, stuffed with a duck, stuffed with.
Does she still have this for for a meal once a year?
I think they've moved on, but yeah, there's still ceremonies for the last, for the last several hundred years or so. They're still counting the royal swan.
Hey, could I get one of those swans over here? No, that's mine, my swan.
Well, how does she know if somebody's taking a swan?
Yeah, well, there are people that have gotten in trouble. There's some recent people that have been fined and imprisoned for eating or capturing swans. Anyway, the bigger picture here is let's get to the watershed moment, because I bring this up. It's just an example of what's called the enclosure of the commons in general. And in particular, I want to focus on the Enclosure Act of 1773. The reason this is a big deal is that beyond all other previous enclosure acts that have been going on, this one basically was structured to basically give those who wanted to privatize essentially carte blanche to make it so.
So you're saying this act gets passed, and therefore now I can claim all the swans, all the land.
No, because you're just a commoner.
Oh, right. I can't claim shit.
No. You can never eat swan again.
Okay, well, let's step back for a sec here, because you're using these fancy terms like you always
like
do,
swan.
you academic types. Yeah, like swan, duck, and goose. No, these terms like enclosure of the commons, and I think it's important to talk for a minute about what's meant by the commons.
Well, why don't you do that?
Yeah, well, I'm a member of this really cool group. It's called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, or WEALL. And they put out these briefing papers every once in a while. And there's one I found recently written by Monroe Fraser and Thomas Mand. And they listed a few ways to think about commons. And I'm going to give those to you, sort of going from the most physical to the most abstract. So one way is you can think of the commons as an entity, something like a forest or a fishery, right? Something that is
like a quote unquote resource.
Yeah. But there's also an attached governance piece to that. It's not just the resource, but there's also some way that people manage that resource. So that's one way of thinking about a commons. Another way to think about it is that it's an entirely alternative system of resource governance that's separate from what we normally think of as the two big systems today, the market and the government or the state. Mm-hmm. So the idea of a commons-based resource governance system is it's designed by a community of people who share the resource.
Okay, so not the professional technocrat, bureaucratic class, but it's actually the people that are living with and associated with, maybe benefiting from those resources, are involved in the management decisions.
Right, exactly. And then there's a third kind of most abstract way to think of the commons, and that's sort of a alternative social paradigm or a different way of thinking that acknowledges our connectedness with each other, our shared heritage, and our shared responsibility for ensuring well-being for future generations.
Okay. Thank you for that. That helps. Definitions. You're good at that kind of stuff.
But we're talking the first one mostly here with enclosure, the original enclosure of the commons in Britain. We're talking taking land.
But it has implications for what you also talked about in terms of the mental models people walk around with, how they think about the world. So I think that's important. And let me back up again, since let's put this into context.
Let's never go forward.
Yeah.
Let's just keep backing up.
Keep reversing. I'm just thinking. Imagine you're a member of a tribe or a hamlet of peasants, and in this situation, you basically are living directly off the land or the waterways and the coastal resources, and you don't own per se any of these. These are all held in common, and nobody could tell you couldn't go somewhere to hunt or forage or collect wood as long as you belong to that particular area and were basically associated with the commons and its management. And so this is an astonishing way to think about the world. Because right now, I mean, I look outside and look at the farm. It's all divvied up. Like, I don't just go walk across my neighbor's property. I just feel weird about doing
this is messed up, because I was looking at a map of your property, and you live 1 mile away from my favorite brewery, which we would have to cut across
private property.
Yeah, like Farmer Jackoff's field over here, who would probably shoot me on the way. And it sounds like the way you were describing before would be kind of a lot more fun.
Explore. You just go exploring or whatever, and like hunt mushrooms or hunt game, and how it kind of worked in these agrarian settings with these peasants is they met and they would divvy up arable land fairly. And the local lord and royal class, like in the manor system, they mostly stayed out of this. Maybe if there's disputes, they would get involved, but most of the way that people interacted with the world were like this, and they persisted for hundreds or thousands of years. And there are mechanisms for individuals to work with their talent and improve their situation in life. There are systems for sharing what you could not be managed individually, like teams of oxen or making cheese. So they sort of figured out, like, with a very low overhead, right? They're just kind of doing it themselves, how to live in a place.
I think what's interesting for me in thinking about this a little bit is that we tend to contrast sort of Western ways of organizing and dealing with property and land and resources. And we contrast that with like indigenous cultures, for example, right? And we say, and we've talked about this with colonization, right? Like, this idea that we come in and we can conquer and own all this land and it's all theirs for ours to do what we want with. But it's interesting to think that there's this dynamic of commoning, right? If you want to use a verb, in Europe.
Oh yeah, that was the way. Yeah,
right. Even though they had kings and fucking aristocrats and whatever else they had a caste system or kind of a hierarchy of power in society. There's still this dynamic of sharing resources collectively in a community.
Yeah, that's the way it was.
Yeah, one example that's been explained is called the open field system. This is just one representation of how commons can work, but each farmer in this open field system, they didn't have their own farm or pay rent to work it, but the field would get divvied up based on a bunch of criteria, like what's a healthy crop rotation, what's the local ecology, what kind of traditions do we have in this area. And it was also tied even to the technology they had at the time. They had, oxen pulling a plow, and it was really hard to turn that plow around, so they would divvy this land, this open field, into really long strips and say, okay, Farmer Jason, you take that strip this season, a share, you take that strip. Rob, you're not allowed to farm because you suck. You go over there and do something else.
So we could have a strip that goes a mile straight to the local brewery.
Yes, that's my part. I'll bring you guys beers.
Yeah, okay. Right.
Love it.
So totally different than these sort of square fields chunked out, right? Surveyed and fenced. It was just like... No, go. This is your strip of wheat. This is your strip of barley or whatever. So, yeah, fascinating.
And it wasn't, just to point out, it wasn't just arable land, right? Commoners had historic rights to fisheries and marshes and forests. And, I know that we'll get more into kind of the impacts of this change in society through this act that we're talking about and other laws that were passed to take that away. It goes way back, this sort of struggle, like the story of Robin Hood, right?
Yeah.
Robin Hood, the ballads go back to the early Middle Ages. But it's interesting, by the early 1800s, there was a critique already at that point. They sort of changed what the ballads were because they were passed down orally, I guess, oral tradition, to critiquing the so-called forest laws that barred hunting and forest harvesting by peasants.
Yeah.
So, I just, when you're talking about Robin Hood, I just think of the Errol Flynn movie. You guys ever see that old?
I haven't seen
old
that
Robin Hood.
There's so many.
I think it's from the '60s, but it won Best Picture. But it's hilarious. It's like this guy running around in green gymnastics tights.
Men in tights.
And he just kind of goes, ah ha ha, ah ha, and he stabs some aristocrat and goes off, swings on a vine, ah ha ha.
Yeah. The sheriff in those days actually had a lot to do with forest management. So that term is interesting,
Sheriff north of Nottingham.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The Nottingham Forest is a big forest. Sherwood Forest. Yeah.
Well, okay, so we have this whole notion of the commons, we have this long history, but why in the hell was this happening where you got this 1773 Act and you got this history that led up to that, and people are starting to privatize stuff that means taking away people's livelihoods? My one-word answer to that is economics. Basically start following the money, following the power.
Yeah.
Think about it. The wealthy people, they are looking for ways to make money, increase their power. Well, one of the things that they realize is, hey, we can sell a bunch of wool, but we need people to be shepherds. We need people out there managing this process. Well, if they're not able to farm this land, then I can push them out to deal with the sheep. Or let's say you've got global trade starting to pop up and you need wood for your boats. It's like, okay, I can push these people out of the forest, and now I get the big trees to make the boats that I want to have.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion at the time. We're talking going back to the 11th century through the 1800s. As you get more and more towards what we're talking about in this act, the discussion really talks a lot about efficiencies and really denigrating the peasants for not being efficient. And what was fascinating—
What an insult! You damn inefficient peasant, you!
Yeah, well, what it's about is that the rentier class, in a sense, could extract higher rents from farms that were larger, growing commodities. So this is sort of in their mind, there's a highest and best use case to be made for kicking the peasants off and getting this into sort of private hands that are consolidated production. And measuring in this perspective, they get a higher rent. However, this was not actually the best way to grow more food. So people looking at this at the time could show that the small scale farmers that were primarily feeding their families could produce a lot more per acre, let's say, but they weren't really generating a lot of cash, and so they really couldn't pay rent to the same degree.
Right. Wow. That's, let's end that practice.
Yeah.
I hate it when people feed their families.
Right. Right. So in terms of
self-sustaining, that sucks.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of efficiency, it was the peasant farmer with small lots was very good at getting a lot of food per acre, but not a lot of money per acre.
Metrics like dollar per acre, dollar per anything, that's always the way to a sustainable economy. Always.
It's how we judge everything to this day.
Yeah.
Except in their case, it was pounds, right? We touched on this a little bit, but this the Enclosure Act of 1773 we picked it as our watershed moment, but it really is part of a history that went on for centuries. This gradual degradation of the commons, this push to turn what was in common into private property. And, interestingly, there's some discussion theories harkening all the way back to the Norman conquests.
Is this like Norm from Cheers? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it was a whole bunch of Norms.
Norman Bates from Psycho stabbing everyone in the shower.
Oh, yeah, he'd win every war.
Now, the Normans coming from the continent of Europe.
Yes.
Conquering the British Isles.
Right across the channel, right? They're just across the channel. Easy.
Yeah, they took the...
They were excellent swimmers.
They took the channel.
They took the channel, yeah. When they conquered the Saxons, when they conquered England, those lands, they installed their own aristocracy, and they rewarded their backers essentially with land. So this, in a sense, was the beginning of a process of saying, well, this can't be held in common. We need to somehow grab it, control it, whether we're making rent off of it or we're passing it off to cronies or people who support us to maintain power. And over the centuries, there were various laws that were enacted. This one, I think, was really a key one because it was a serious legitimation of it through the Parliament, the British Parliament, of this ongoing process. And, I think it also tied into this acceleration of globalization, which I think we'll talk a little bit about.
Yeah,
as well.
I do want to go back to Robin Hood for a sec, who is like your emblem of resistance, the sort of myth of it. And, you're talking about how there's this erosion over time where the aristocracy is coming in and taking away and chipping away. But at the same time, I think it's probably much more untold history, but there's always resistance, protests, uprisings, and there's a few that you can find that are actually named, but like the poem that you started us off with, Jason, is clearly a protest of, hey, give me my goose back.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of violence. There was a lot of violence associated with this, a lot of draconian crackdown.
Medieval levels of violence.
A lot of
Literally
aristocrats. A lot of aristocrats were shoved up the cloaca of a swan as a result of this.
Beheadings was very common, and wasn't the Norman Bates thing, the stabbing? They would just cut your head off. Yeah. This particular act is impactful in the 1773 Enclosure Act in a number of ways, but one of the main ones we're focusing on is that it sped things up, right? It really allowed for a rapid loss of commons, which tied into the Industrial Revolution and the need for urban wage laborers. And this was a very conscious process, and there was an incredible amount of shade thrown at peasants, commoners, so to speak. So I've got a quote from this guy named John Middleton. He was a London and Middlesex County historian from this period. Big proponent of enclosure.
You got to do it in a posh British accent. Do that.
The commons were of real injury to the public by holding out a lure to the poor man, by affording him materials wherewith to build his cottage and ground to erect it upon, together with firing and the run of this poultry and pigs for nothing. This is, of course, temptation, sufficient to induce a great number of poor persons to settle upon the borders of such commons. But the mischief does not end here, for having gained these trifling advantages through the neglect or connivance of the lord of the manor, it unfortunately gives their minds an improper bias, and inculcates a desire to live from that time forward without labor, or at least with as little as possible.
So wait, what's that guy's name again?
Douchebag John.
I hate him. Wait, so I can't think of a
You want to go back in time and just punch him in the face?
Think about how industrious you would have needed to be to be taking care of yourself and your family. Right. By working with your community to get what you need off of the commons.
I know he's talking about they're running their poultry, they're running their pigs, they're building their own cottages from the wood.
These trifling,
awful.
These poor people that don't do anything.
Oh, that's hideous.
I know it is pretty bad, but it talks about what was lost, right?
Yeah. But getting back to what you just talked on, Jason, around the Industrial Revolution, I think this is really key in the timing of the Enclosure Act, because we talked earlier about profit seeking from rent, renting of land. We have a situation as the Industrial Revolution is ramping up in Britain, and we have to remember that this was where it really started. Yeah,
right. They got a head start.
They needed to get fucking people into the factories, right? To go make cheap goods and flood the global market with them, right? So they had to shut down local craftspeople. They had to basically take folks off of the land, in a sense, and stick them in the factories to support the growth of this industrial revolution.
Woohoo! We get Dickens.
Well, and this stuff continues on, right? Like the 20th century ideology that just wants to crush the commons. You guys may be aware of the ecologist Garrett Hardin and his ridiculously famous paper called Tragedy of the Commons.
Yes, very influential.
Yeah, I mean, that term is ubiquitous.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because you don't really think an academic paper is going to turn into a common everyday colloquial saying.
Well, it fed into what certain people wanted to hear is what happened.
Well, I want to give you a quote that sort of where he lays out his thesis. This is out of the paper. He says,
and this was in
1968, I think.
Okay.
So long time ago, but not all that long ago.
Long time ago. That's like around when we were born.
Yeah.
Making me feel
old.
Yeah.
Well, you are old.
Yeah. Over half a century ago.
You don't remember the 1773 Act, but,
Just barely. It was just before my time.
Yeah. So here's Garrett Hardin. He says, and I guess he was probably American, so I'm not going to do your posh British
Californian,
accent.
I think.
Yeah, the rational herdsman concludes that the only sensible course for him to pursue is to add another animal to his herd. This is talking about if I had an open access field of grass. So it says add another animal to his herd, and another, and another. But this is the conclusion reached by each and every rational herdsman sharing a commons. Therein is the tragedy. Each man is locked into a system that compels him to increase his herd without limit, in a world that is limited. Ruin is the destination toward which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interest in a society that believes in the freedom of the commons. Freedom in a commons brings ruin to all.
Bizarre. This is such a bizarre thing. So, talking about ecological limits, right?
Yeah.
When you look at our economy, it is the economy that we have now, where everything is essentially privatized and totally about self-interest.
Yeah.
That's what's driving us to
is
the
ironic,
limit. Like to
isn't it?
think that people don't know how to fucking compromise with one another in a community.
Well, that's it. He took sort of that homo economicus idea, this economic man who is just a rational money grabber and not like I'm just going to go out and take what I can and not worry that you're just going to come kick my ass tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know?
It's a projection of the society he's living in at the time. Was interesting, and so there's been a lot of research about the specific way that these people interacted with the commons and their cattle. And there were rules. That's what's so amazing. And these poor people, they had to eat these animals. It wasn't like they're like, oh, I can make more money if I put another one on. Let me get another. It's like, no, they had to breed them. They had to then eat and milk. And it wasn't like they could suddenly just flood any kind of pasture with additional animals anytime they wanted.
And also, I mean, you've brought this up before, Jason, too. Like if I am having all this excess, but my neighbor is starving. Like, how much security do I actually have?
Right. No,
it's so strange because I guess you never spoke with an anthropologist, right? Because you study other cultures who do practice the commons, right? Or you look at historically the many, 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 many generations that operated that way sustainably, right? Like.
This is in 1968. He didn't have the internet. He couldn't just email somebody or look anything up.
Well, let's talk about the anti-Harden, or sort of like I guess like Christ antichrist, Harden anti-Harden. I don't know. Anyway, Eleanor Ostrom is who I want to bring up. She was a political scientist who was actually the first woman to ever win the Nobel Prize in economics.
Probably the last best thing that they ever did.
Well, maybe. You're right. I mean, she's kind of a hero among what I think of as outsider economists, like ecological economists and people who are not thoroughly engaged in the neoliberal economics framework. So what she did is she actually went out and studied commons rather than theorizing about them like Hardin was doing. She looked at how do these work? How do people manage them? And she found tons of successful examples all around the world and really helped start this big backlash against that thesis of the tragedy of the commons. You might even call it like the triumph of the commons, based on how well some of them were managed. And she even kind of later on, I think in the 90s, Hardin recanted his thesis. He said, it should have been titled The Tragedy of the Unmanaged Commons.
Yeah, let's give some credit to him that he did accept that feedback.
But that's so... Sorry.
Yeah.
There were no unmanaged commons, right?
Well, that's true.
When you defined them earlier, Rob, you talked about there being two key ingredients, right? And one of them was how they were governed.
Well,
yeah, I think in essence, if you don't have the good governance, they become unmanaged commons, and maybe then they get denigrated.
I mean, you can definitely find examples of commons that have suffered and been degraded, but that's why, right? The governance breaks down. So you're exactly right, Asher. In fact, there's a guy named David Bollier who's like a kind of a commons guru. And he wrote a book called The Commoner's Catalog for Changemakers. Really, really good. We're going to come back to this in a bit. But in that book, it talks about how the idea of unmanaged commons, that's already an oxymoron right there. Because as you say, that's part of the definition of a commons, is that it's managed. What Hardin's talking about is something more like a free-for-all, or something that people are not working together on. And there was this guy who, kind of like us, I guess he likes to throw stones at people that can't fight back. He said, this guy Lewis Hyde, he said it should have been called, instead of Tragedy of the Commons, it should have been called The Tragedy of Unmanaged Laissez-Faire Commons Pool Resources with Easy Access for Non-Communicating Self-Interested Individuals.
Yeah.
Or as I like to call it, the tragedy of a shit show run by sociopaths.
Yeah.
Which is the modern day economy.
Right.
Oh, man, that describes most corporate cultures in this nation.
Yeah. Well, what I found fascinating about all of what we're talking about is we see the coming together of this package of beliefs and practices that will eventually be known as neoliberalism. The notions of private property, of commodification, of this rentier class, of simplifying the culture and the landscape, of globalization. All these things you see manifesting at this period in history, with the start of the Industrial Revolution coinciding with basically the obliteration of most of the commons as a source of livelihood for people there.
Yeah. Wow. So that's the dream, right? To join the rentier class. Sit back and you guys pay me a bunch of money while I do nothing. That's don't talk about the lazy peasants, right? Talk about the lazy rentier class.
And this is the economy we have now.
I know.
Even if it's not about like a rentier class, owning property and land that people are working, right? Owning everything essentially.
Like stocks and intellectual property. Like it's gone
housing.
Into,
Now we've got a rush of these
commercial
big
property.
hedge funds buying up housing, getting into that game. They just sit back and they make profit off of people.
Well, it's fascinating to think about that Britain was a colonized territory since the Norman conquest in the 11th century. And the elites that were in charge were not really from the same clans as these commoners. And this division then seems to be feeding into this gross inequality in land use that is building up during the Middle Ages. And then there's this point where we're talking about that it accelerates in the early Industrial Revolution to produce this model now for empire and development that is then spreading around the globe. And there's a guy named Simon Fairley. He's really into sort of the history of agriculture, which if you're studying that, where he lives in Great Britain, that really includes then how agriculture changed as a result of the loss of the commons. Mm-hmm. And here's what he says, quote, Britain set out more or less deliberately to become a highly urbanized economy with a large urban proletariat dispossessed from the countryside, highly concentrated land ownership, and farms far larger than any other country in Europe. Enclosure of the commons, more advanced in the UK than anywhere else in Europe, was not the only means of achieving this goal. Free trade and the importing of food and fiber from the New World and the colonies played a part. And so did the English preference for primogeniture, bequeathing all your land to your eldest son. But enclosure of common land played a key role in Britain's industrialization and was consciously seen to do so by its protagonists at the time.
Yeah, it's like a unbelievable confluence of events. And
it's a watershed moment, dude.
Right. Well, but part of the confluence, too, something else we talk about all the time is the fossil fuel piece, right?
Yeah.
It's like around that time that coal deposits are turning Britain into this superpower, and they're industrializing the hell out of everything. And then they're exporting all these finished goods around the world that's coal-fired. But they're also exporting people who are desperate to get away from, like, you want to work in a coal mine? No, not really. You want to work in a factory? No, not really. Well, then go colonize the rest of the world.
You want to get out of prison? Go to Australia.
Right. So you got this giant global empire developing out of that too.
And it's not just how the economy is operating, people's relationship with land, this dynamic of class and power. This enclosure of the commons is transformed mindsets and belief systems. It's interesting to think about, but like we really do act as though individual property rights is like like a law of nature, right? I mean, we have all these legal systems based to sort of codify this stuff. But
so much of law is basically possession and property, a huge amount.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we could have done a watershed moment on the first lawyer probably, and that would have been interesting. But let's just step back for a second and just recognize, right? It's not a law of nature, right? It's not. In fact, the alternative, right? This idea that our relationship, and we've spoken about this mostly from the standpoint of humans managing land and natural quote unquote resources in commons with one another. We haven't even talked about managing in common with other species, right? Which I think we need to just reference. But this approach of not seeing land property as that possessed by the individual or the family has been the norm, has been the dominant paradigm for most of our history as a species. So what we are living with is actually an anomaly, but it's so deeply embedded in our mindset that it's like impossible to imagine that you could, how do you have a house if you don't own it?
It is weird though. I mean, I feel like I questioned this as a little kid, like the whole notion of, I wanted to go across that creek to get to whatever was on the other side. And it's like, oh, that's somebody else's land. They own that. You can't go on. Like, what? It just felt weird. Like, really, I think you're right. It's an anomalous time that we live in where you're not able to freely move about like that.
Yeah, I've heard it termed as like we cultures turned into I cultures, and that was very unusual.
Yeah.
Well, there's even been language changes that are associated with this enclosure of the commons. So the word trespass, it went from meaning a general wrong against someone to meaning entry on another person's property or grounds without legal authority. And the word occupation, that's another one. It went from meaning occupying or holding office to occupying or possessing real property. My favorite word evolution here, it's less documented than those two, but the word landlord went from meaning someone who stewards the land to douche-o-matic scum pumper.
Okay.
Douche-o-matic scum pumper.
Okay, nice one, Rob. How long did you work on that? How
How
many beers?
I've always appreciated people who can take swearing up to another level.
Yeah, good.
I'm not. What is a scum pumper?
I think they go into the septic tanks, maybe. I don't know.
Right. That could be a job for me. I'm gonna look into that.
I'm thinking about what this means for the future. Looking ahead. Part of what happened then is you've got this reliance on your community and your place, and then you end up starting to rely on then the employment and the state. So there's a guy named Stephen Quilly writes about this. I find it very interesting, Canadian academic, where the market state sort of took over what he calls the survival unit. And so you used to have these local based survival units, but then that shifted to becoming a wage laborer and you get integrated into some global trade pattern, right? And now, you don't know you don't even know what mushrooms will kill you or what are tasty, right? So he traces this back also to the enclosure movement as sort of a loss of the ability to have livelihood in place.
That's really amazing because you see people falling out of that survival unit now. Like the people, all around the U.S., people are living on the street and the numbers are mushrooming.
Right. Well, that's the thing is what he talks about is that the state market sort of duopoly that's supposed to be the trade-off we make, right? Like if we're no longer going to have our livelihood in place, our survival unit be the place,
be the commons,
then it has to be the state market system.
Right.
But that is starting to fail.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not exactly delivering, right?
No, it's not delivering. And there's actually tons of people. Of course, the hippies with the back to the land movement, but you've got all these sort of Christian conservative types that are homesteaders. You've libertarian bents, more neo-green type agrarian folks, organic farmer type people. There's actually a lot of interest in having more livelihood in place. And he looks at the failure of the state market duopoly as necessitating that you kind of rebuild this third leg sort of a modern survival unit. Maybe the state market system doesn't disappear immediately or anything like that. But if it's going to weaken, if it's going to leave a lot of gaps, rebuilding this local place, this livelihood in place as a means to have some form of a survival unit going forward. All right, guys, great sponsor for today, the Marianas Trench Holdings Incorporated. These guys are thinking long term. These guys are future.
Finally, a freaking company that thinks long term. I'm excited. What do they do? Come on.
Well, you got to think about most of the property on the surface of the planet has already been parceled out and bought up.
Right.
So, savvy investors are looking for the next place to go.
Sure. So deep in the ocean.
Oh my gosh.
The deepest place on Earth.
The deepest place on Earth. But a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of life down there. Most animal phyla, most multicellular life, you can find representatives of them even at the darkest, high pressure.
So you're saying there's a moose in the Marianas Trench?
Nothing quite like that, but there are chordates in the same phylum that moose are in.
Okay,
but they're called
that.
tunicates. They're little sea sponges. So yeah.
Often confused for moose.
Okay.
But there's a real advantage here, though, guys, because you think about it, this is all about hedging. You got your property in New Zealand with the bunker, right? You may have something in the Swiss
I do
Alps.
have that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. You're in Montana. You've
covering my bases.
Right. Yeah. Go to the deepest, darkest depths of the planet.
Oh, so this is like not plan B. This is plan Z.
Right,
This
like
is
the
plan
collapse
Z.
comes, all those properties you own across the planet, that's all wiped out.
Right.
But if you can own a piece of the Marianas Trench, this is great because those little, what'd you call them, spongy guys?
Yeah, I'll be almost all the animal
SpongeBob
phyla are
SquarePants.
down
Like
there.
after a couple of geological eras pass by post-collapse, that could be like my nephew
Or in
climbing
10
out
or
of the
20
ocean.
million years, that's where it's going to
Talk about
start.
long-term investment.
Exactly. This is a
They are thinking.
long play,
Nice.
folks. Think about
We like
get,
it.
Get your, you buy stock, get your stock in Marianas Trench Holdings.
Yeah, get a piece of the holdings of the Marianas Trench, folks.
Every decision I've ever made in my entire life has been wrong. My life is the complete opposite of everything I want it to be.
If every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right.
So it's a little bit difficult to talk about doing the opposite when so many of our commons have been eroded by this huge legal infrastructure that we've been talking about. But there are some commons that still exist. And the key is to manage them properly in a way that they can last over the generations and still provide for what communities need. And going back to our economic hero, Eleanor Ostrom, people who have looked at her work have listed these 8 rules for managing a commons. And I found this in an article that was based on a book by Derek Wall. And the book is called Eleanor Ostrom's Rules for Radicals. And I'm not going to sit here and read you guys all 8 of these rules, but I did want to cover a few things that, on some level might seem kind of like, well, of course you should do that. But, on another level where we're stuck in this private property mindset, maybe it bears talking about. So one of them is that commons, the rules for managing it should be dictated by local people who understand local ecological needs. Mm-hmm. Another one is you got to have participatory decision making. People are more likely to follow the rules if they had played a role in making those rules. Yeah. Third one is that the commons have to be monitored. And this was interesting to me because the idea is once the rules have been set, communities need a way of checking that people are actually keeping them. And the idea is that commons don't really run on goodwill. They run on accountability.
So you're not quite a utopian, anarchistic radical. You're actually trying to get accountability, making sure people follow what they say they're going to do. That's good.
That's right. We know that I'm a douche-o-matic scum pumper, not a utopian whatever the hell.
Well, we could borrow some practices, from the folks who were pushing for enclosures of the commons, and we could behead people if they're not.
That's right.
Following
Right,
the rules,
right. Stuff them into a swan. This one was really interesting too. It's the last one I'm going to share with you guys. That the sanctions for those who abuse the commons should be graduated. You don't just throw people out the first time they break the rules, because that just creates resentment in your community. Instead, you'd have systems of warnings and then fines and make it so your reputation gets dinged and that kind of thing. So it's
pants them in public.
Yeah, you can put it in the stocks.
right. But no, I mean, this stuff's really interesting. Like, if you want to have a well-functioning commons, you obviously have to have governance and structures that help you manage it.
I want to know how to be a commoner. I want to be a champion of the commons. How do I do that?
I got the perfect book for you.
Okay.
Danny, the Champion of the World. Ever read it?
No, what are you talking about?
Oh, come on, man. Roald Dahl.
Danny, the Champion of the
Oh,
World.
the Willy Wonka guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
You wrote a great book. And it's all about Danny and his father. And his father goes off at night to go poach pheasants that are owned by this asshole wealthy landlord dude, landowner guy.
He needs Robin Hood on his side.
And Danny has to go and rescue kind of his father. It's actually a great read. It's not going to give you like a blueprint for how to be a commoner necessarily. But
In an irony for this particular podcast, Asher is giving us the children's book, and I'm going to give you the adult book on this subject. It's usually reversed there, but we mentioned David Bollier in his book, The Commoner's Catalog for Changemakers, earlier, and I read through it, and it's really good. It's actually short. It combines a ton of really awesome information, and as a bonus, Post Carbon Institute is mentioned in the book.
that's the only reason you like it. Right?
But basically, he says, this is a book that's about the art, culture, and politics of commoning. It's the practices of talking with each other, coordinating work, experimenting, figuring out solutions to shared challenges, and how to make them local, distributed, and fair. That sounds pretty damn good to me. And the book really does follow through on that. It has lots of really awesome examples. So yeah, let's talk about a few.
I think some basic ones, but they're steps in the right direction. Use your dollars, your purchasing power to support cooperatives. There are many cooperatives that are out there. We've got a co-op here in town, a local grocery store. There are all kinds of cooperatives that exist. Some of them are employee owned, and operated. So put your dollars there rather than putting them into some privately owned business or publicly traded company. There's also just, again, a small example, but part of pointing in the right direction. We at PCI and all of our publishing that we do at resilience.org and publications that we do, we often turn towards Creative Commons licenses to get images. There are people who write things and they publish them using a Creative Commons license. So the whole thing there is to just put it out into the world, not seeking to profit from it, not seeking to own copyright and control and ding people if they've used it, but using this Creative Commons license.
It's also worth adding that there's cool governance structures around a Creative Commons license, like about how you can share it, what you're allowed to do, and making some kind of derivative product from it. So really useful, like you say, for people who are putting information out into the world.
Yeah, and I run a CSA, a community supported agriculture. So I feel that's part of this as well, because basically I'm taking this land here and growing food for local people. So I feel it's part of sort of the local provisioning movement. And there's other ways of doing this too, supporting land trusts that maybe allow for some livelihood to occur via that land. Some can be explicit agrarian trusts, for example, but even other land trusts do things like that, allow for grazing rights or farming even. So I think there's ways also then to maybe people come together, buy land around where they live for that purpose.
Yeah, and if you're just looking to get kind of more informed about how to champion the commons, like we said, there's David Bollier and his book. I also have worked a little bit in the past with a really smart guy named Jay Waljasper, and he helped found a group called onthecommons.org. They've got some really good stuff.
Yeah, and I think the last thing, this is more challenging. We talked a lot about things being locally based, local decision making, local commons in a sense. I think we also have to think about the global commons, right? Mm-hmm. And Peter Barnes and others have been leading the charge on seeing, for example, the atmosphere, the oceans,
the Amazon basin, for gosh sakes.
Yeah, as something that has to be held in the commons. The air, the quality of the air, the climate is something that is not just shared by humans, but shared by all species.
And this is something where you see, like, a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of the principle of subsidiarity, where you push management down to the local level as much as possible. But when you're talking about the global commons, it's still, this has got to be at that more nation state level as well.
Yeah.
But I think there's got a lot of work that has to be done on legal shifting of property rights and making it more possible for commons type things to take place. And there's also the mind shift, right?
Yeah.
So just recognizing this whole idea of private ownership of every goddamn thing, maybe has not always been the norm, and it may not be the way to get through in the future.
Well, I don't know about you guys. I'm going to get started by going down to the local co-op. I'm going to buy some fence posts, some barbed wire, and I'm going to enclose a little piece of property over here and do my thing.
You're going to become one of the squatters, squatter rights. Just go for it.
You're a scum pumper or whatever that.
We want to give a special thanks to Ilana Zuber, our star researcher of the watershed moments through history. Without her work, there's no way we could have covered such sweeping topics this season.
Yeah, and we also want to thank our other outstanding volunteers. Anya Steyer provides original artwork for us, and Taylor Antal prepares the transcripts for each episode.
And a big, big thank you to our producer, Melanie Travers, who helps us bozos stay professional.
And finally, thanks to you, our listeners. If you want to help others find their way to Crazy Town, please drop us a 5-star rating and hit that share button when you hear an episode you like.
Crazy Town, da 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 da, Crazy Town.